The shadows beneath the floor. The old house at the end of Willow Lane had been abandoned for decades. Its windows were boarded up, its paint peeled like dead skin, and its roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. But to Emma, it was perfect. She had always been drawn to old, forgotten places, and this house was no exception. When she saw the for sale sign, she didn't think twice. She bought it the next day. The real estate agent had warned her. "This house has a history," he said, his voice low and cautious. "People say it's haunted. Are you sure you want to live here?" Emma laughed. "I don't believe in ghosts," she said. "Besides, I love a good fixer-upper." But as she stood in the empty living room on her first night, the house felt different. The air was heavy, and the silence was unnerving. The floorboards creaked under her feet, and the shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking. She told herself it was just her imagination. The first night, Emma spent the evening unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. By the time she finished, it was late, and she was exhausted. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, where her bedroom was, and collapsed onto the bed. The house was quiet, save for the occasional groan of the wind outside. But as she drifted off to sleep, she heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from beneath the floor. Emma sat up, her heart pounding. She listened carefully, but the sound had stopped. She told herself it was just the house settling. Old houses made noises after all. She lay back down and closed her eyes. The scratching started again, louder this time. It was coming from directly below her bed. Emma's breath quickened. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it under the bed. There was nothing there. The scratching stopped. She got out of bed and knelt on the floor, pressing her ear against the wood. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Something was moving beneath the floorboards. The discovery. The next morning, Emma inspected the floor. The boards were old and warped, and some of them were loose. She grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox she'd brought and pried one of the boards up. Beneath the floor was a dark, empty space. Emma shone her flashlight into the hole, but she couldn't see anything. The space was too deep. She pried up another board, then another, until she had created a large enough opening to climb through. She hesitated for a moment, then lowered herself into the darkness. The space beneath the floor was cold and damp. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic. Emma shone her flashlight around, and her breath caught in her throat. The walls were covered in symbols, strange, twisted shapes carved into the wood. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic. In the center of the room was a large, circular hole in the ground. It was too dark to see how deep it went. Emma's heart raced. What had she stumbled upon? The whispering. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The scratching had stopped, but now she heard something else, a faint whispering. It was coming from the hole beneath the floor. She tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the voices were calling to her, begging her to come closer. Emma grabbed her flashlight and climbed back down into the space beneath the floor. The whispering was louder now, echoing off the walls. She shone her flashlight into the hole, but the light didn't reach the bottom. She leaned over the edge, straining to hear what the voices were saying. They were too faint to make out, but they sounded desperate, almost pleading. Suddenly, something grabbed her arm. Emma screamed and pulled away, falling backward onto the floor. She scrambled to her feet and shone her flashlight into the hole. There was nothing there, but the whispering continued. The shadow over the next few days, Emma became obsessed with the hole. She spent hours staring into it, trying to figure out what was down there. The whispering never stopped, and it was driving her mad. One night, as she sat by the hole, she saw something move in the darkness. It was just a shadow, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. She leaned closer, shining her flashlight into the hole. The shadow moved again, this time closer to the surface. Emma's breath quickened. She could see it now, a dark, shapeless mass, writhing and twisting in the darkness. She stumbled back, her mind racing. What was that thing? And why was it in her house? The ritual. Emma spent the next day researching the symbols on the walls. She found an old book in the local library that mentioned similar symbols. According to the book, they were part of a ritual used to trap evil spirits. The book also mentioned a way to banish the spirits, a counter-ritual that required specific items and incantations. Emma gathered everything she needed and prepared to perform the ritual that night. As she stood by the hole, holding a candle and chanting the incantation, the whispering grew louder. The shadow in the hole began to writhe violently, as if it were in pain. Emma's hands trembled, but she continued the ritual. She had to finish it, no matter what. The escape, the ritual worked. The whispering stopped, and the shadow disappeared. Emma breathed a sigh of relief. It was over. But as she turned to leave, she heard a sound behind her. She turned around and saw the shadow emerging from the hole. It was larger now, more defined, and it was coming straight for her. Emma screamed and ran for the stairs. The shadow followed, its form shifting and twisting as it moved. She climbed out of the space beneath the floor and slammed the boards back into place, but the shadow was already pushing against them. She grabbed her keys and ran out of the house, not stopping until she reached her car. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The shadow was standing in the doorway, watching her go. The aftermath. Emma never went back to the house. She sold it a few weeks later, warning the new owners about the shadow beneath the floor. They didn't believe her, of course, but she knew the truth. The shadow was still there, waiting for its next victim.